Welcome to another episode of the Make Mental Health Matter show. I am your host, Kelli Melissa Reinhardt, and I am excited for my guest today, as usual, I feel like. But we have been having some really great time in studio with having guests come in and be able to talk face to face, which is something that I never did for about 3 years. So
Wow.
it's great to have human connection.
Yes, definitely.
And share stories. So I am actually going to let Sabrina tell a little bit more about herself, your story, and then, whatever you want to share at first. So feel free.
Okay, cool. So I'm Sabrina Wright-Hobart. I'm the development coordinator with the Crisis Center. The Crisis Center is a local domestic violence agency. We serve the 18th and 23rd Judicial District. All our services are free, confidential, and trauma informed. And they include a 24-hour crisis line, emergency shelter services for those in imminent danger, community based advocacy, legal advocacy, therapy, and community education. We actually just launched a lawyer program as well. So in the past, we've been able to, one off get a lawyer to do pro bono services for our clients, but we were able to find some funding that we're able to actually provide lawyers for our clients. So that's really huge. And one thing I like to always point out is even though our service area is the 18th and 23rd Judicial District, which is Arapahoe, Douglas, Lincoln, and Elbert counties, when it comes to emergency shelter services, we don't care where you're calling from. And that's true for all domestic violence agencies in the Denver metro area. Okay, the need for emergency shelter services is higher than the supply, right? So if somebody calls our crisis line and they need emergency shelter services and we have space, we're going to give it to them and we're not going to ask them where they're calling from. Nice. Okay. If it's one of the other services that's within our service area, we're just going to refer them to the appropriate agency for that area that they live in, right? So I always want people to know that the crisis line is completely confidential. People that call the crisis line, they don't have to be ready to leave their partner. They may be questioning whether it's abuse, what's going on. We are a safe place to call. We'll never tell you what to do. We're going to offer you resources and we are going to do safety planning with you. But calling that number does not mean you're starting the process of leaving your partner. I think that sometimes can be a barrier for people to call and get help.
Yeah. Well, and domestic violence is such a heavy, big topic, but needs to be talked about, and we don't talk about it enough, and it can go either way. But I also, so how long have you been with the Crisis Center?
So I've been with the Crisis Center a little over 3 years now, but I've worked in domestic violence since 2011. So I worked for a different domestic violence agency for 10 years prior to moving over to the Crisis Center. Same mission, different service area, right? But prior to that, I actually worked in breast cancer. That's how I started in nonprofit world. So I'm a breast cancer survivor. And I initially got breast cancer the first time when I was 37. And the reason I think it's significant to kind of my story and to the story of domestic violence is that, when Susan G. Komen for the Cure started, nobody talked about breast cancer. It was taboo to talk about it. Now we talk about it all the time, right? I want intimate partner violence to be the same way. We need to get rid of the shame and the stigma that is around it. It is such a common experience, unfortunately. And we're here to help and not judge anyone, right? And we really want people to find their own power back within themselves. So the other piece, too, unfortunately, is if someone has domestic violence can impact anyone, any age, any economic level, any socio, education level, everything, right? So imagine being in an abusive relationship and then getting a diagnosis of a potentially terminal illness. All the barriers there are to leaving in an abusive relationship, that just adds way more. right? And so I've seen it since, I'm quite far away from 37 now. I've seen various survivors over the years, either, a lot of times when they get diagnosed, someone will leave them, right? And they're devastated, but they're actually probably better off than having that person stay around and be their caretaker when that person is not a kind person,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah.
And I know, I mean, not that I want to always bring up the pandemic, but
Yes.
we one of the things that really has come out of that is that this understanding that not everybody is safe at home. And that
Correct.
was the big thing that when I heard those words, I was like, "Ugh." It was like Mufasa, like, ooh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, but not everybody's safe at home.
No.
And there's so many like more cases of domestic violence and or murder at that time.
Yes.
Like it got so elevated, and I still don't know if we've fully seen what has transpired from that time.
Correct. Correct. And I also think that there could be further implications of this current time as well from the economic standpoint. So what we saw during COVID, not the crisis center, I wasn't with them, but it was really globally, right? This happened all over the world. That the calls at crisis lines dramatically dropped, and to your point, because people weren't safer at home, they couldn't call and get help.
Mm.
The other piece of that, and I don't have a PowerPoint or anything with me, but relationships exist on a spectrum. So they're not always great all the time. So you can have a relationship that's not healthy, but it's not abuse, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
the difference is abuse is about control. Domestic abuse is about control, coercive control over another person. So you can have an unhealthy relationship. But that what happened with COVID, with the additional financial stress on everyone, as well as not being able to get away from each other, it took many of these relationships that were kind of iffy and took them into abuse, right? And so that's what can happen when there's a lot of economic stress, other things like that going on in the economy, in the greater world, right? So we saw that as soon as the lockdowns were lifted, we went right back up to pre-pandemic levels, right? All over the world. The reality is that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 7 men will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. And most people that experience it the first time before they're the age 25.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So it's really important everyone understands what it is. That's a big part of my job is breaking down the mess, right? So many people believe that intimate partner violence has to have physical violence for it to be abuse, and that's simply not true. Even if people experiencing the violence, right? We see people in our community-based advocacy, in our therapy programs that sometimes they're still in the relationship, right? We're trauma informed. We're not going to tell them they have to leave. What we're going to do is we're going to give them education around what domestic violence looks like, what it is. We're going to safety plan with them within the cycle of abuse, okay? And we're going to give them all of their resources. It's up to them to choose what resources. So sometimes people decide to stay with their abuser. That's not our choice, that's their choice, right? We're there to help people and figure out what's best for them in their life. But as far as the cycle of abuse goes, I just always like to point this out that every individual, every family that comes through the crisis center or any domestic violence agency, they're unique. They have such unique needs, and they have needs beyond just the trauma from domestic violence, right? So it's really important that we meet people where they are when they come into our services. But the reality is that all over the world, as unique as everyone is, we see the same cycle of abuse.
Wow.
Okay. So I'll just kind of go over that.
Yeah.
So initially, all of these relationships, they start off great, right? None of these relationships start off abusive. You're not going to get into it in a relationship with someone that's a jerk, right? Yeah. So they always start off great. One red flag could be it's too great, right? They come in and sweep you off your feet, and everything's just it's too good to be true, right? And the abuse is going to start off subtle in most cases, right? And it can take years to build into more extreme abuse, or even physical violence. Again, it does not have to include physical violence for it to be abuse. Um, and then the next phase is the tension building phase. Okay, I call this the walking on eggshell phase, because you're really trying to placate your partner. Tensions are building, and you're doing everything to kind of, everything's fine. Oh, I don't want to cause any problems. I'm not going to bring this up right now because they're obviously annoyed and I'll just make them matter, right? And then the incident happens. A lot of times, this is when a crisis line is called, okay? The incident, once again, it can be physical, it does not have to be physical. It could be, I'm not going to give you money to go to the grocery store. I'm not going to let you have the keys. I mean, it can look like so many different things, right? It's very unique to each relationship. But those are just some examples. And then the reconciliation. Often you hear this called as the hearts and flowers phase. And so the abuser, the perpetrator, is going to apologize for their behavior. Often, though, what they do when they apologize is they don't really apologize. They put the onus back on the victim. So they'll say things like, well, that wouldn't have happened if you hadn't said such and such. Or they'll use excuses like, well, I was drinking, right? And so that's why it happened. And that's one thing I always point out is, unfortunately, alcohol abuse is a real thing in our world and in our society. There's a lot of people that abuse alcohol. They don't all abuse their partners. So to me, alcohol use is an excuse for the behavior, right? And so they're really not taking, and they're also gaslighting their partner, right? They're making them question their own sanity. No, that's not really how it happened. No, I didn't say that. You did such and such, and even it may not even be true. And the person's going, "What is it me?"
Yeah.
And so often when we get people in our services that are in the relationship, that's how they approach us. They're like, "Well, I think there's something wrong, but I think it's my fault." Right? So yeah, we just help them figure that all out and educate them. Once again, we don't tell them what to do. But I think that's really important for people to know. The other big thing that people need to know is that from the ages of 16 to 24, I think it's younger, but I'd say start looking at 14 probably. But highest incidence of domestic violence. Okay. So if a young person ends up in an abusive relationship at a young age like that, they're likely to continue in that cycle of abuse their entire lives unless something intervenes, right? Someone calls a crisis line, the police somehow get involved. We're very happy at the Crisis Center that 70% of the people that call our crisis line have never had any involvement with the police. Part of our mission is prevention. We want people to get to us before the police need to be involved, before it gets to that point. And that's something that breaks my heart. Working in domestic violence since 2011 is you see these cases and on the news. Those are the ones that make the news. The murder suicides are often when the person is leaving, almost exclusively when the person is leaving or the perpetrator has found out they're thinking about leaving. Actually, the risk of homicide goes up 75%. That's why emergency shelter services are so important in our community, right? But yeah, it's just it's really hard for people once they're in to get back out. It takes an average of 9 times for someone to leave their abuser. So that means they leave 8 times and go back. And on the ninth time, they actually leave for good. So many reasons for that, right? Of course, it started off with love. You're trying to, a lot of times, well, if I just fix this one thing, everything will be fine, right?
Trying to find that person.
Yeah, exactly. Habit. Maybe you've been with a person a long time, but honestly, the risk of violence, the intimidation, if there's children involved, often they'll threaten to take the kids, maybe even kill the kids, kill themselves. All these kinds of threats that keep victims from leaving and getting help. Economic abuse is huge, and it happens in all economic levels. So we never charge for our services. We never ask anybody their income level. But most of our clients come from Douglas County.
Okay.
So people think, oh, well, Douglas County, it's a wealthier county, right? Um, well, if you're a millionaire and you can't access your money, you're just as poor as the next person.
Yeah.
So it's very essential that we're here and that people in upper economic areas know that we're here, and that they can access help. Okay. Um, Regardless of income. Okay.
Yeah.
It's really important for people to know. The other thing, it impacts both men and women. That's why in the 2010s, we changed our name from the Women and Family Crisis Center to the Crisis Center because we were seeing more and more men in our services. Okay. And that really goes along with breaking down those myths as well. Not to say that physical violence doesn't happen from a woman to a man, it does and it can, but it's more the emotional abuse, right? That kind of thing. And so, really taking that stigma away from men as well and breaking down those myths, right? That you don't have to have physical abuse for it to be abuse. But we even had a guy in our shelter at one point that she was physically and emotionally abusing him. Um, her physical abuse wasn't hurting him physically. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He was so much bigger than her, right? It didn't physically hurt him, but emotionally, right? The damage that does. And, black eyes and broken bones, they heal. Trauma, that only heals if you deal with it. So that's why for our services, except for emergency shelter, because emergency shelter is only for people in imminent danger, usually when they're leaving, right? Okay, because they could get killed if they're found. Yeah. Right. But in all our other services, it's really not time limited, right? You could have been in a domestic violence relationship 10 years ago. You got safely free, luckily, and now you're dealing with it. Right. Now you're like, okay, now I'm ready to deal with that trauma. Oh, I recognize I was an abuse survivor. So many times people don't even recognize what that is, right? So really important for parents, and grandparents and the whole community really to be aware of what intimate partner violence looks like, particularly in youth, and how to intervene. Okay. So you don't have to live with someone to experience abuse from another person. Okay. So teenagers often don't live; they live with their parents, right? So there's a few things around this. So in the state of Colorado, kids as young as 12 years old can access our services without parental consent.
Wow.
Okay. Telehealth has really greatly helped that because most 12, 13, 14-year-olds can't drive to get services.
Right.
Yeah. And they'd have to ask mom or dad to take them. Right.
Yes.
And if they want it confidential, then, and parents would be like, well, why wouldn't my kid want to talk to me? Right. And I would say, yeah, of course, you always want to have that open conversation with your kiddo. But if your kid's not willing to talk to you about it and there's another resource where they can get help, don't you want them to get that help? Because once again, if they stay in that pattern, the rest of they're likely to be in it for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Very concerning, as a parent myself, and my kids are in their 20s now. But I know your natural reaction is if your child's dating someone that you're questionable. Our initial reaction is you can't date them anymore, or you can't date her anymore. That's the worst, absolute worst thing.
Rebellious.
Yes. So this is not just for youth. Anybody, if you know anybody that you suspect is in an abusive relationship, when you talk to them about it, ask open-ended questions. Avoid giving advice. They don't need advice. Okay. And often our advice is not going to be correct if we aren't experts in domestic violence, right? And focus on the behavior of their perpetrator, right? Rather than on the perpetrator. So instead of, that's Susie, I can't stand her, I don't want you dating her anymore. How does it make you feel when Susie wouldn't let you go to the movies with your friends the other day? Okay. How did that make you feel? Well, what do you think about that? Kind of having those open-ended conversations. And truly, if you come in and say you can't see the person anymore, they're more likely to continue seeing the person but not talk to you about it. So you've cut off the communication, and that's what perpetrators want to do. They isolate their victims, right? That's one of the signs that family members can recognize right away is this person's pulling away from me. They started dating this person, and now all of a sudden they're not going out with their friends. They're not calling their mom every day. They're not, doing the things that they used to do. So that's, and sometimes they'll move them out of state too, to get them away from all of their family and friends. And then they can't leave to go make friends. So then they're isolated, right, in the home. So it can be very, very challenging for people that are experiencing it. And nobody goes into a relationship thinking it's going to be like that.
Yeah.
For perpetrators, often, it's a learned behavior.
Yeah. And I want to talk about that. We're going to
Yeah.
go to our first quick sponsored break.
Yes,
but once we get back, I have a couple of thoughts that popped up. So
Okay, good.
We'll go to this quick sponsor break. We'll be right back.
Have you ever felt completely alone?
Like your life doesn't matter.
One person dies due to suicide every 40 seconds.
You are not alone. Call the National Suicide Lifeline at 988.
Hope and recovery is possible.
1 in 8 people globally live with a mental disorder.
That's why empowering minds saves lives.
We need your help.
With only $19 a month, you help us save lives through mental health and suicide prevention education.
Scan the QR code or go to makementalhealthmatter.org to sign up as a warrior for mental health today.
Hi everyone, I am Sinead from Brador. I'm from Johannesburg, South Africa. Please join me in my Power Hour every Sunday, 12 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on E360 TV. Mwah.
Hello, this is Steve Ramona with the TV show Together We Serve, Fridays, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern on E360 TV. Together We Serve. Hello, this is Steve Ramona.
And like that, we're back.
We're back. Yay.
It's the TV magic.
Yes.
If you happen to be just joining the Make Mental Health Matter show, thank you so much for tuning in, whether you are watching or listening. My guest Sabrina and I are really talking about what she is passionate about and where she serves a good chunk of her time with the crisis center and domestic violence, but also being a survivor of cancer.
Correct.
So I have a couple questions that pop into my head about what we were talking about prior, but I also want to kind of circle back just a little bit.
Okay.
More personal as far as the cancer. And I know we were chatting before that your hair is coming in very lovely now.
Yes.
And I love just like creating, although I think that domestic violence obviously is so important to talk about, and it's definitely a space that you have been in for a very long time.
Yes.
And it is important for people to recognize and know what to look for. You had mentioned that isolation is one of those key cues,
Yes,
especially when we're looking at youth, which I didn't realize that as young as 12, like in my brain, I was thinking child abuse, right? Because they're so young.
Yeah.
But I guess the difference is that it's coming from a partner and not your parents or an older adult.
Correct. And from my personal experience, so in middle school is when kids start dating. Okay. My kids didn't date outside of school, right? They didn't even talk to their boyfriend, girlfriend, like on the phone outside of school, but that concept was already there. Holding hands in the hall, oh, that's my boyfriend, that's my girlfriend kind of thing is already starting then. So it's important to start paying attention then. The actual statistics say 15 to 24, but I personally think that, people are just maturing quicker nowadays. They have more access to information and media, and so I would start looking out at 12, but that's just me personally. These statistics say 15. But it's never too young to start talking to your kids about certain concepts that boundaries, like no, you don't have to kiss everyone or hug everyone, about consent, right? All of those you can talk about consent without talking about sex. You don't have to be right? Like consent is even at 5 years old. Like, do you let grandma have a lick of your ice cream or not? Right?
Yeah.
Like, no, you can't have my ice cream. It's mine, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So those kind of concepts you can really start talking about young.
Yeah. I didn't even, I mean, until you said that, that makes sense, right? Because I know the doctors with young kids, like my son actually just turned 10 recently, but always at every physical, right? Even the doctor tells him like, hey, because you have to check all your parts, right?
Right.
But only the doctor or your parents, and
Yeah.
only when your parents are in the room,
Right.
So we started having those conversations when he was little.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't think about, I mean, we've talked about other like, don't let people do things that you don't want them to do, right? But that's a good way of like, do I give you permission to eat my ice cream? Do I give you permission to have a bite or drink out of my cup? Right. So yeah, that's a great way.
Absolutely. It's so important just to start teaching those skills young. But the ultimate idea is that, a healthy relationship is both people having equal say in the relationship, right? And I personally believe that a healthy relationship starts with self-respect, right? And self-love. And I think we do a huge disservice in our society that, we get a message from the time we're very young that you're not a complete person unless you're in a relationship. Right. And so many people in this world are willing to be in terrible relationships rather than be alone. And if they were willing to be alone and really love themselves, they would find themselves in wonderful relationships. Right. So it's really kind of sad. We really need to flip the script when we're but that's a heavy lift, right? I mean, the media is telling us. I mean, there's a lot of things that are telling us. And that goes to people that are perpetrators too, right? They've grown up in a household, particularly if there was no physical violence. They think that's how you solve conflict. That's their love language, right? Like, and so I always tell people, because working in intimate partner violence this long, I can't tell you how many times I've had people say, well, why don't they just leave?
It's not that easy.
It's not that easy. Number one, do you have an hour? I'll tell you why they don't just leave, right? But I say we need to ask a different question. We need to ask why the perpetrator treats a person that they love that way. What is going on with the perpetrator that they can't live without the other person, without killing them, killing themselves? We just saw that horrible case where the guy killed his children. Do you know what I mean? These things, they're real. They happen. And I want them to happen less, because I want people to know that domestic violence agencies are all around. Just look. If you don't know your local one, call the National Domestic Violence Hotline. They'll find out your zip code and route you to the right area, right? They're all free. It's free information. They're going to do safety planning with you. That's what we care about, is keeping people safe, right? Yeah.
And I think I'm like, where was my brain just going? So kind of talking about, and so there's two parts to what my brain's going.
Worries.
But so one part is, which is interesting, maybe, to this conversation, because I've been listening to the book Let Them, Mel Robbins, right? And I got to the part that she's talking about relationships and being in healthy relationships and loving yourself before you're in a relationship, because you're just going to bring whatever baggage, right, with you into that. And if we don't go into relationships healthy, then it probably will not be a healthy relationship.
Right.
So that went into my brain, is like, you can really only control yourself. You can't control others. And when we do change that conversation to, even as parents, right? Like now is like not telling your kid that they're bad at something, or like those little subliminal messages that maybe we don't think about as parents, because it's almost like we're trying to help them, but we almost hurt them in a way. So like, not saying like, oh, well, you're not very good at sports, or, oh, you're not very good at walking, right? Like if they trip
are
all
you
the
sure
time.
you want to take that role in that play?
Yeah.
Like, I'm surprised you even got cast.
Yes,
Or,
yes.
things like that.
Little things, or like,
yeah.
oh, do you really want to hang out with those friends? Because they're
Right.
not very nice to you, right?
Right,
Like those
right.
little things. And
Yeah.
I have become very aware of it throughout time, especially understanding more about mental health and maturation periods and trauma and all the things, right?
Yeah.
But I think that as parents, we have to be very aware of what we say and flip it of like, hey, you know, like math may be really hard right now, but I know you're really smart and you can do anything you put your mind to.
Exactly.
And just making sure that, hey, you may have lost that game if they're playing a sport, and just say there's always the next game.
Right.
So pumping them up.
Yeah.
Not that we're coddling our children or that we're setting them up for failure by any means, but really truly, like, the mind is so powerful that you could say, I'm gonna, like my son, he's like, I'm gonna be a famous soccer player. I was like, great. And then he says, I'm gonna buy you a Bugatti, and I'm like, great.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, good, do it.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to set him up for failure by any means.
Right.
I am just trying to give him the opportunities that maybe he didn't think were there, and maybe that's not the end result, but that's okay. It's
but
still,
don't crush his dreams while he's young.
Yes.
Right? Don't crush his dreams. Let him dream. Let him dream big. Right? Instead of trying to bring him back to earth and go, oh, well, that's not realistic. You know,
no, it could be.
Yeah,
you
it
never
could be.
know.
You don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know. Right? But if you limit yourself and you limit your children by what you say, and, you know, I grew up in a different generation where, you know, it was very much, well, you're a girl, so you're gonna grow up, you're gonna be a mom, you're gonna, you know, kind of thing. And I'm still mad at my dad. He knows. I love you, Dad. I'm still mad at him. He's gonna turn 90 this year, but he wouldn't take me to see King Kong when it came out in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
He took my brother, but he wouldn't take me because he said I was a girl and I would be too scared. So I still remember that in my 50s.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
So what your parent, you know, when you're a parent, I mean, it's a lot of pressure, and we're human and we learn from our mistakes. So don't forget that. But also try to keep in mind whatever you say, like, you don't know what's going to stick with the kiddo, right? And how that's going to impact their choices moving forward. Right. For me, it just made me mad, and, like, you know,
you're like, I am a girl and I'm going to do what I want.
Yeah, you know, yeah, exactly. But, you know, some other people might, well, I can't do that. I'm a girl. I'm not going to do that kind of thing. So,
yeah, you never know, like, what they pick up on. And I know I've had those experiences too, as like, and I've talked to a lot of other people that even the best intention that we have as a parent, even like taking our kids, like, to dance or ballet or something, and maybe it has the opposite effect of like, now I feel like this fat kid in this tutu, right? Or however that experience is for them. But I think it's important also as parents to just talk with them and make sure that what we believe is going to be beneficial for them is also beneficial for them. But the way that my brain went also is that because we talk a lot about bullying. And I always believe the right question should be, what's happening at their house?
Correct. That's a learned behavior.
Yes.
That is a learned behavior. So often at least one of the children is experiencing some sort of violence at home. Right. And that's the thing. Kids that witness domestic violence, you know, they're more likely to become perpetrators or victims. They're more likely to have substance abuse issues, to get into trouble, right? To have depression and anxiety. And these are things that can linger for life, right? So we really want to intervene and stop that. And so at the Crisis Center, what we hope is that each family and each individual that comes through our services, that we're breaking this cycle for that family, right? Or that individual. And we do a couple of things to accomplish that are a little different than the domestic violence model throughout the country, right? So the normal domestic violence model for emergency shelter is bunk style living and 30-day stay. Usually 20 to 30 some 40 beds depending on the shelter, right? And we originally were like that, probably 25 bed shelter, everybody in trauma together, and it wasn't working. Our advocates, this was before I was there, but they said, this isn't working. I mean, we're housing people for 30 days, but we're not making any progress with them. We're not really working on what they're here for. And, because it's a lot of, when you have all these people in trauma living together, it causes a lot of conflict, right? And so they were dealing with that kind of stuff. And then the reality is that, 30 days is really not long enough, because we not only want to help people get free from violence, we want them to get and stay self-sufficient. That's the piece that needs to be there to break that cycle of abuse, right? And so we evaluate our emergency shelter clients at 30 days, but as long as they're working towards their goals for self-sufficiency, we keep them up to 4 months. Okay, so that gives them more time, not only to deal with the trauma, right? But also to access those resources that they need: housing, transportation, childcare, education sometimes, right? Like, everybody has different needs. So to that point, we work with our community partners to provide those wraparound services that our clients need, right? That's awesome. So I always want to make that point, because we're experts in intimate partner violence, but our clients have all kinds of needs. The number one need, of course, is housing, and I always say the number one need is lawyers. So that's why we're happy about our
understanding what is out there that can help you and help your situation and help your family. And okay, I have another thought that popped in, but we're going to go to our last quick sponsored break. And maybe you'll have an answer for me, maybe you won't, but we'll be right back after this.
1,917 people die daily from suicide globally.
I lost my middle sister, Carrie, to a completed suicide on February 20th, 2017.
How does Kelli, host of the Make Mental Health Matter show, impact lives?
Number 1. Awareness.
My story, however, it isn't unique. I am a domestic violence survivor and a recovering addict. For 14 years, I was in active addiction. And because of Kelli and the work that she does and the opportunity to have my voice heard, I was able to stay clean and sober and have hit a year. I'm still here. And if it wasn't for Kelli answering my call the day that I thought I was going to take my life.
2. Conversation.
I'm curious, and I know that I've heard a lot in the BIPOC community, it is very hush-hush. It's one of those things that you don't talk about. You literally feel like it's not a conversation you can have. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
First, shout out to Kelli, because I'm glad that she asked the question. I researched you before I went on your show, and I saw how real and authentic you were. And I just appreciate the question, because it is different and we have to have tough, courageous conversations. So yes, I always say I'm a triple diversity threat. I'm a Black woman with multiple disabilities. Now, I'm not really a threat, but to other people, I may be, because people fear the unknown and what they're uncomfortable with.
Number 3. Education.
Kelli's passionate commitment to mental health awareness is a beautiful thing. It's clear in her social media posts, it's clear in the resources that she puts together, in the activities that she provides, her collaboration with organizations, and the consistent way that she continues to deliver a message, encouraging people to understand that they can share openly and to break the stigma around mental health. Kelli's topics cover children and adults, talk about things that we can do as a community, things that we can do individually, and her website is packed with information and resources and all kinds of contacts that you can use to reach out, whether you're dealing with something yourself or you're looking to help somebody else who is struggling. I encourage you to check it out.
1,907.
And like that, We're back. If you happen to be just joining the Make Mental Health Matters show, make sure you go back because you missed like the whole first half.
Right.
I am chatting with my guest today, Sabrina, and we're having the tough conversation that not a lot of people want to have, and that is centered around intimate partner violence. That was something that I wanted to correct myself because I believe that we're moving away from domestic violence into intimate partner.
We are. And so you'll hear both terms, and they're both valid, but we're really trying to move people more towards intimate partner violence because that's really our wheelhouse. So our 24-hour crisis line, right? I asked the ladies, I said, what are our most referrals out? Like that people call and we're not the right organization. And often it's people that call and say, I'm afraid of my teenager, right?
Okay.
My kid's acting out, they're being violent, that kind of thing. We refer them to another agency. Okay. Because that's more family violence. We're dealing with intimate partner violence. So that's within a relationship, right? Not that doesn't impact the entire family and the entire community, but that's really our wheelhouse, right? You can have other types of violence too. And we are happy to give advice around it, but we're going to refer out. For example, elder abuse, right? Elder abuse can happen in a home that never had any intimate partner violence, right? Or if there was already intimate partner violence, then it's probably going to be pretty bad, right? So you kind of have to look. I mean, intimate partner violence intersects with so many of our other societal issues, right? We talked earlier about, human and sex trafficking. A lot of times people are both domestic violence and sex trafficking survivors, right? It really does intersect with so many of our other societal problems that's why I'm so passionate about it, because I feel like if we could do a better job of prevention and really getting to youth and changing the conversation around relationships for everyone, that we could prevent more of this, right? And we'd live in a better world, right? I also believe that it would reduce other crimes.
Yeah. Well, and it like feels for me. So I had one relationship in the past that went that direction.
Yeah.
Luckily, I was only with them for a very brief moment in time. I feel like it was like 8 or 9 months. And because I'm very much like black and white, I'm either in or out.
Right.
And there were those like knockdown, drag it out fights. And when it became violent, it was more like that person got frustrated and they hit the side of a wall with a broom, but the broom handle came off and hit me in the face. And I was like, oh hell no. Like that was my but then I got, and it was alcohol related also. But I got really pissed, and then like I was trying to fight back. That's not the best thing to do either, but it was that moment, and I was like, wow, this is where we're at, and then realizing this person also very narcissistic, and it wasn't, when it first started, I was at probably the lowest point in my life. And I was drinking a ton. I had just lost my job. I had just finished college. Like I was kind of in this like celebratory, but like negative space.
Yeah.
And this person, I really truly believe now, being out of it for so long, is that they knew that I was like really vulnerable at that time. And this person tends to be that person every time they come into relationships. The interesting part though is, as I've gained more knowledge and I understand narcissism and mental health and trauma, right? I think about it really, this person is really looking for love, like their idea of love. And I don't think that they've ever experienced that. So they just keep going partner to partner to partner to partner.
Yeah.
Because they're like grasping to this identity of love that they really truly want, and they're never finding it, which ultimately probably makes them angry. Like if I think about the cycles, because we don't resolve, like you just said, if we don't resolve that childhood trauma, and it goes the same with mental health and all these things, right?
All of it's connected. Yeah.
If we don't figure out what that piece is, and if we don't change it or resolve it or like make it better in some sort of way, it just creates that cycle and that pattern, and we've got to break it like you said. So I think that it's hard, and we're not saying by any means we want to give you some tools and information and resources. It is hard to ask for help, whether you are struggling with intimate partner violence or any type of abuse or any type of mental health challenge. It's hard to ask for help, but the best part is knowing that there are resources out there that can help you, and especially the crisis center, that up to 4 months. I know that your
and they have their own space as well. So we went away from the shelter model. We actually have partnerships with extended stay hotels.
Oh, nice.
So our clients don't go to a traditional shelter. They go to undisclosed extended stay hotel room. And these extended stay hotels are like little apartments. So they have a kitchen, they have a living room, a little dining room, doors that close. Unless it's a single person, we might put them in a studio, but they still have a dining room, living room, right, kind of thing. And they get that dignity that they need, and also that space, right, to really work on what they're dealing with. So the other thing is that when our clients are in emergency shelter, which obviously various extended stay hotels, our therapists or advocates will go to them if they want. So it's really up to them. Do they want to come to us for their therapy or advocacy services? Do they want us to go to them? We'll go to them. We provide all of their groceries and all their needs while they're in our services. Legal advocacy, obviously we have a office down in Castle Rock in the courthouse. So usually people are at the courthouse anyway, so that's how they get that. But I just wanted to point out that, we did all of these changes on purpose because these were all with the client in mind and what was the best for them and their not only recovery, but going on to self-sufficiency and breaking that cycle. I mean, I can't stress that enough. That's
so important. And the question that I had, and maybe you can or can't, and I don't want to go full political by any means.
Of course not.
I do know that as far as the cancer, so just cancer research and things of that nature, you are a huge advocate towards that. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But the question that I have is because I have had so many people in my life that have had the instances of intimate partner, not a ton, but several people. They had intimate partner violence. They have children involved, and they have gotten to court multiple times. And for whatever reason, the judges believe that it is better for the children to stay with a perpetrator. That blows my mind. And I know we don't have a ton of time left, but I'm curious if you have a little insight into that.
Yeah. So I think that's why legal advocates are so important. Our legal advocates can't give legal advice, but they actually help our clients navigate the legal system around domestic violence. So it's usually around restraining orders, child custody, and child visitation. Okay. So in the state of Colorado, if you were married or have children with your perpetrator, you, in 9 times out of 10, are going to parent. You're going to co-parent with that perpetrator. Okay. That's the way the laws are set up in Colorado. It is not enough for a child to witness domestic violence for it to be considered child abuse. In some instances it is, but it has to be really severe what they saw. Most cases, no. So to get single custody with supervised visitation, really high bar. You're probably not going to get there unless you're in a really awful situation, right? So we hope you're not there. So anyone that goes through our services has the opportunity to be in a support group and get ongoing support, but particularly our legal advocates talk to their clients about how do you parent with an abuser, keep yourself safe, keep your kids safe, and follow the law. Unfortunately, perpetrators can be very charming and manipulative, right? And so they can go into court and they look great and the victim looks awful. And so then the judge is going to, oh, well, the dad should take the kids or the mom, depending, it's not always, but, and, so having a legal advocate there that actually works at the courthouse is really great because they can recognize like when these dynamics are happening and have side conversations with the people, right? And be like, I think this is what's happening, and you might want to, kind of thing, and point out those dynamics too, as well as keeping the victim, right, informed of what their rights are, how they need to comply, right? The thing that drives me the most crazy about perpetrators, and legal advocacy could talk more about this, but one is some of them hide their money, so they pay very little child support. And a lot of times women, unfortunately, they don't make as much as men in most cases. So when they do leave a perpetrator, their social status may have really gone down. And usually they're the ones with the kids at least 50% of the time. But what perpetrators will do, they hide their money, so they pay less in child support, and then they're either inconsistent or they don't do their visitation at all. This is another way to control their former partner, but who they're harming are their children.
Yeah.
And they're causing generational trauma. Right. And so it's bad, and we don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, a lot of it has to come back to laws changing. We weren't aware, or at least I wasn't. And I just found out that a couple of years ago, they passed a law that in Colorado, any minor child has to have both parents' consent in order to do therapy. We do therapy at the Crisis Center completely for free. We're able to see kids as young as 3 years old. However, even though we're confidential, we're mandatory reporters. So if child abuse is disclosed, we have to call CPS. So most perpetrators or, potential perpetrators, that the parent is not going to agree to their child being in therapy because they're afraid the kid's going to say something and we're going to have to call CPS. What they don't realize is that the bar is really high for it to be child abuse.
Ugh.
Right. I know. It's
That's
yucky.
like,
It's yucky. There's a lot of
hate
things
that.
in this world and in this field that you just gotta accept it and hope that you can change it. you know.
I mean, and that's why
yeah.
advocates are so important, and the work that you guys all do are so
Right.
important. And we could totally talk about this forever, but
Oh my
we're
God.
coming to the
I
end.
know. Yes.
So,
But I wanted to say
yes.
one thing real quick.
Yes.
Thank you for talking about your own personal experience. I too, and this is not how I ended up in domestic violence, but I was in an abusive relationship in my early 20s. I did not live with him. And when I started becoming more independent, luckily he just went on and found somebody else, right? He didn't come after me.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's the big problem. But the reality is we dated for 3 years. He didn't hit me until we were like 2.5 years in.
Oh, wow.
Okay. But there was a lot of manipulation and control going on that I didn't recognize until I got educated. So really just, for teenagers especially, love is not abuse.org, I think it is. Look it up. Love is respect. That's what it's called.
Love is respect.
Loveisrespect.org. There's lots of things out there. Look at the signs, be educated, be an advocate. This impacts everyone in the community. You may think you don't know anyone that's experienced it, but you probably do. You may know someone that's experiencing it now. So be an advocate, be aware, know the crisis line, 303-688-8484. Call it. If we're not the right organization for you, we're going to get you referred to the right organization. So, yeah.
And I know, this goes out globally, but those of you that are in Colorado, give the phone number one more time.
303-688-8484. And I should have the National Domestic Violence Hotline memorized too, but I don't. But all you have to do is Google Domestic Violence Hotline, and that's the national hotline. And like I said earlier, they're gonna find out what zip code you're calling from, and then they're gonna get you to the right agency in your area.
Amazing. And I'm sure it's on the Crisis Center website. It's
Correct.
Also on Make Mental Health Matters website. So if you are in a crisis and you need the domestic violence national line, it is there. But please also share, how can people reach out or find you if they want to follow what you're up to?
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, follow the Crisis Center on social media, right? We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook and LinkedIn. We do have a YouTube channel, but I'll admit we have like a staff of like 16, and it's me and Amy that do the social media. So we're not always that active, but we're trying. We're trying. But yeah, follow us on that. Keep up with us. We do a lot of third party events. It's our 40th anniversary. So our gala on November 7th at the Wings Over the Rockies at Centennial Airport. It's going to be a huge celebration. And you mentioned earlier how hard it is to call for help. I always say people that call the crisis line are so brave. They have been told they're stupid, that nobody will believe them, that nobody will care. And they pick up that phone and say, I need help. It is the bravest thing. And then we're so fortunate every year at a gala that, Amy's able to, that at least one survivor that's been through our services that are safe and won't be re-traumatized about talking about what happened to them. And they go up in front of 300 strangers and share what they went through. And it is so inspiring. And yeah, just
awesome.
Yeah.
I know. I'm going to have to put it on my calendar.
Yes.
Well,
definitely.
thank you so much for being an amazing guest and having such a wonderful conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
This has been great.
I would love for you to come back next week on Monday. I go live every single Monday at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. You can watch on E360 TV, or you can listen on Dream Vision 7 Radio at 5 a.m. or 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time or Mountain Denver Time, whatever we're on right now. But make sure you tune in no matter which one, and I will see you all next Monday. Bye y'all.